The lantern flickered in the window of the weathered ranch house, casting its golden glow across the Oklahoma prairie darkness, a beacon that would change 2 lives forever. Delia Zimmerman set the glass lamp on the windowsill for the 342nd night in a row, though she had stopped counting after the first year. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the wick, ensuring the flame burned steady and bright. The ritual had become as essential to her as breathing, a silent promise made to a man who might never return, a hope that refused to die despite the endless stretch of days and nights that had passed since he rode away. She pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window, staring out into the vast expanse of grassland that surrounded her small ranch just outside Ardmore, Oklahoma. The year was 1884, and the land still held its wild beauty, untamed and fierce. Somewhere out there, beyond the rolling hills and endless sky, was Kieran Yates, the cowboy who had stolen her heart 2 years ago and ridden off with a promise to return. The memory of that last morning burned bright in her mind. Kieran had stood in this very room, his hat clutched in his calloused hands, his green eyes dark with regret and determination. His father had been arrested for cattle rustling, charged for crimes he swore he did not commit. Kieran had to go north to Texas to find proof, to clear the family name, to fight battles that honor demanded he face. "Wait for me," he had said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will come back to you, Delia. I swear it on my life." She had nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and watched him mount his horse and ride away as dawn broke over the horizon. That night, she lit the lantern and placed it in the window, a signal fire to guide him home, and she had done it every night since. The ranch hands thought she was foolish. Her brother Samuel, who visited from town once a month, gently suggested she move on with her life. Even the reverend had implied during Sunday services that faith was good, but false hope could poison the soul. Yet Delia could not bring herself to stop. Deep in her bones, in the marrow of her being, she felt Kieran was alive. She felt his heart beating somewhere under the same stars that watched over her lonely vigil. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters and making the flame dance. Delia pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. At 23, she knew people talked about her. The spinster on the edge of town, pining for a cowboy who would never return. Let them talk. She had made her choice and she would live with it. She turned from the window and moved through the small house, checking that the doors were secure. Living alone had taught her caution. The ranch was modest, just enough land to keep a few cattle and horses, chickens pecking in the yard. It had belonged to her father before a fever took him 3 years back. Her mother had passed when Delia was just a girl. This land was all she had left, this and the memory of a love that had burned bright and fast before circumstances tore it away. Sleep came slowly that night, as it always did. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the prairie, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of wind through the grass. In her dreams, she saw Kieran riding toward her, his horse galloping across the plains, his face lit with joy. But when she reached out to touch him, he dissolved like morning mist, and she woke with tears on her cheeks. Far to the north, beyond the Red River and deep into the Texas panhandle, Kieran Yates sat by a dying campfire and stared at the stars. His horse, a sturdy buckskin named Ranger, grazed nearby. The night was cold and Kieran pulled his coat tighter, but the chill he felt went deeper than weather. 2 years. 2 long, brutal years of chasing down witnesses, digging through old records, confronting men who would rather shoot him than tell the truth. But finally, he had what he needed. Papers safely tucked in his saddlebag, proving that his father had been in Kansas City, The day the cattle were stolen, signed affidavits from 3 separate witnesses, including a bank manager and a telegraph operator. The real thieves had been caught 6 months ago in New Mexico, and in their confession, they had cleared his father's name. Kieran had received word by telegram that his father had been released from prison 2 weeks ago. The old man was free, the family name restored. The mission that had driven Kieran away from everything he loved was complete, and now, at last, he could go home. Home. The word itself ached in his chest. Home was not his father's spread near Abilene. Home was a pair of warm brown eyes and a smile that lit up his world. Home was Delia Zimmerman, waiting for him in Ardmore if she was still waiting at all. The thought that she might have moved on, might have married another man, haunted him every day. He would not blame her. He had been gone so long, with only 3 letters sent in 2 years when the mail routes allowed. Had she received them? Did she know he was still alive, still fighting to return to her? He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the small photograph he carried, edges worn soft from constant handling. Delia's face looked back at him, caught in sepia tones by the photographer who had passed through Ardmore 3 years ago. She was not smiling in the formal portrait, as was the custom, but her eyes held warmth and life. Looking at it was both comfort and torment. "Tomorrow," he said aloud to the night. "Tomorrow I start for Ardmore." It would take him at least a week of hard riding to reach Oklahoma. A week of pushing through territory that was still rough and sometimes dangerous, even in 1884. The Indian Territory was more settled now than it had been a decade ago, but there were still outlaws and drifters who preyed on lone travelers. But Kieran had not survived 2 years of hunting truth and dodging trouble to die in sight of home. He would make it back to Delia. He had to. He lay down on his bedroll, using his saddle as a pillow, and closed his eyes. In his mind, he was already riding toward her, already seeing the surprise and joy on her face when he appeared. Would she be angry that he had been gone so long? Would she understand the delays, the complications, the way each lead had taken him further from where he wanted to be? He hoped so. God, how he hoped so. Dawn came with a wash of pink and gold across the sky. Kieran was up with the first light, rolling his bedroll, kicking dirt over the fire's ashes, checking Ranger's shoes and tack. The horse sensed his urgency and danced with impatience. "Easy, boy," Kieran murmured, running a hand down the buckskin's neck. "We have a long road ahead, but at the end of it is home." He swung into the saddle, oriented himself by the rising sun, and turned south. The land stretched before him, rolling plains giving way to rougher country. He passed scattered homesteads, new settlements springing up as more people pushed west. The frontier was closing, changing. The wild days were fading into memory and legend, but for Kieran, the journey ahead was personal, not about the changing times or the march of progress. It was about a promise made, and a love that had sustained him through the darkest times. When he had been discouraged, when the trail went cold, when men lied to his face or threatened him with violence, he thought of Delia and found the strength to continue. He rode hard that first day, covering over 40 miles before making camp. The next day was the same, and the day after. Ranger was strong and willing, but Kieran had to be careful not to push the horse beyond endurance. A lame horse out here could mean death for both of them. On the 4th day, he crossed into Indian Territory. The land office had recently opened parts of Oklahoma for settlement, and the territory was a mix of native lands, new townships, and vast stretches of unclaimed prairie. Kieran kept his rifle ready and his eyes open. He saw other travelers occasionally, mostly families in wagons heading for newly opened land, their faces weathered and hopeful. That night, as he made camp near a creek, a voice called out from the darkness. "Hello, the camp. Coming in friendly." Kieran's hand moved to his pistol, but he kept his voice calm. "Show yourself." An older man emerged into the firelight, hands visible and empty. He wore a dusty suit and a weary expression. "Name's Edward Marsh. I'm traveling to Fort Smith and saw your fire. Thought I might ask to share it. Getting cold out here, and there is safety in numbers." Kieran studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Coffee is on. Help yourself." The man settled gratefully by the fire, accepting the tin cup Kieran offered. They talked in the careful way of strangers, sharing enough to be polite but not so much as to invite trouble. Edward was a land surveyor, working for the government. He had been out marking parcels for a week and was ready to get back to civilization. "You heading south?" Edward asked. "Ardmore," Kieran said. "Been gone a long time, going home." Something in his tone must have conveyed the depth of feeling behind those words, because Edward smiled. "Wife waiting for you." "Not yet a wife," Kieran admitted, "but if she'll still have me, she will be soon as I can arrange it." "Been gone long, 2 years." Edward whistled low. "That is a long time for a woman to wait." "She's worth waiting a lifetime for," Kieran said simply. "I just hope she feels the same." They talked late into the night, and Kieran found himself telling this stranger about Delia, about the circumstances that had pulled him away, about the hope that had kept him going. Edward listened with the patience of a man who had seen much of life and understood its complexities. "If she loved you true," Edward said finally, "she'll be waiting. Real love doesn't die easy." The words gave Kieran comfort as he finally drifted to sleep. Edward was gone when he woke at dawn, a courtesy not to slow down another man's journey. Kieran found a small bundle wrapped in cloth beside his saddle. Inside were fresh biscuits and a note. "For your homecoming. May it be joyful." The kindness of a stranger touched Kieran more than he expected. He wrapped the biscuits carefully and packed them away, then mounted Ranger and continued south. The days blurred together, a rhythm of riding and camping, of watching the landscape change as he moved deeper into Oklahoma. The land here was beautiful in its wildness, tall grass prairies stretching to the horizon, stands of oak and cottonwood marking creek beds and rivers. He saw herds of wild horses running free, deer bounding through the brush, hawks circling overhead. On the 7th day, he reached the Texas Road, the old cattle trail that ran from Texas up through the territory. It was more traveled now, easier going. He knew Ardmore was close, less than a day's ride. His heart began to beat faster, anticipation and nervousness warring in his chest. What if she was not there? What if she had given up and moved away? What if she had married someone else? The questions circled like vultures, but he pushed them aside. He would know soon enough. As afternoon shadows lengthened, he crested a rise and saw familiar landmarks. That line of trees marked Cedar Creek. That rocky outcropping was Devil's Thumb, named by some long-ago traveler with a sense of drama. And beyond, he could see the buildings of Ardmore itself, small and scattered but growing. Delia's ranch was not in town but east of it, about 3 miles out. Kieran turned Ranger in that direction, his hands tight on the reins. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. It would be dark soon. He rode on, his eyes scanning the horizon for the shape of her house. And then, just as full darkness fell, he saw it. A light. A golden glow in the distance, steady and bright. Someone had a lantern burning in a window. Kieran's breath caught in his throat. It could be anyone, any house. Dozens of people lived out here now. But something in his heart leaped with recognition, with certainty. He urged Ranger to a faster pace, and the horse responded, sensing his rider's urgency. The light grew brighter as they approached, a beacon in the darkness. And then he saw the outline of the house, the shape of the barn, the fence line. It was Delia's ranch. She had left a lantern burning. His throat tightened with emotion so fierce he could barely breathe. After all this time, after 2 long years, she had left a light for him. She was waiting. She had not given up. Rangers' hooves pounded across the prairie, eating up the distance. Kieran could see the house clearly now, the soft glow spilling from the window. His heart hammered against his ribs, a drumbeat of hope and fear and overwhelming love. He slowed as he approached, not wanting to startle her or make her afraid. A lone rider in the darkness could mean danger. He called out as he neared the house. "Delia, Delia, it's me, it's Kieran," inside the house. Delia had just finished washing the supper dishes. She dried her hands on her apron, moving through the familiar evening routine. Check the doors, bank the fire in the stove, light the lantern. She reached for the lamp, as she did every night, preparing to carry it to the window. Then she heard it. A voice calling her name. A voice she had dreamed of, prayed for, waited for through 730 nights. The lamp nearly slipped from her hands. She set it down with shaking fingers and ran to the door, her heart in her throat. She flung it open and stepped out into the yard, straining to see in the darkness. A horse and rider were approaching, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. The rider swung down from the saddle and ran toward her. "Delia." She knew that voice, knew it in her bones. A sob broke from her throat, and then she was running too, her skirts held high, her bare feet flying over the hard, packed earth. They collided in the middle of the yard, and Kieran's arms went around her, lifting her off her feet, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. She did not care. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face against his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. "You came back," she gasped. "You came back." "I promised you I would," Kieran said, his voice breaking. "I promised." He set her down but did not let go, his hands framing her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. In the darkness, she could barely see his features, but she knew them by heart. She reached up to touch his face, needing the physical confirmation that he was real, that this was not another dream. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "After the first year with no word, I thought you were dead, but I could not stop hoping. I could not stop waiting." "I am so sorry," Kieran said. "I tried to write. I tried to get word to you. Everything took so much longer than I thought. Every time I found a lead, it took me further away, but I never stopped thinking of you, not for a single day." "The lantern," Delia said suddenly. "You saw the lantern." "I saw it from miles away," Kieran said, his voice thick with emotion. "That light guided me home, Delia. You guided me home." He kissed her then, and it was like the sun rising after an endless night. Delia kissed him back with all the longing and love she had held inside for 2 years, pouring everything she felt into that moment. His lips were warm and familiar, his arms strong around her, and she knew with absolute certainty that the wait had been worth it. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you every moment I was away, and I will love you until my last breath. Marry me, Delia, please. I know I have no right to ask after leaving you for so long, but marry me." "Yes," Delia said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I would have waited another 2 years if I had to. I would have waited forever." They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, whispering words of love and reassurance, making up for all the time they had been apart. Finally, Delia pulled back enough to look at him properly. "You must be exhausted," she said, "and hungry. Come inside. Let me take care of you." "I need to see to my horse first," Kieran said. "Old habits." Delia laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Of course. I will get the lantern and help you." She fetched the lantern from inside, the one she had lit every night, and held it high as Kieran led Ranger to the small barn. Together they unsaddled the horse, rubbed him down, made sure he had hay and water. The simple domestic task felt surreal and wonderful. How many times had she imagined this, Kieran working beside her, back where he belonged when Ranger was settled? They walked to the house hand in hand. Delia kept glancing at Kieran, needing to reassure herself he was truly there. In the lamplight, she could see him better now. He was thinner than she remembered, his face weathered and lined with new creases. There were shadows under his eyes, evidence of hard days and difficult nights. But his smile was the same, and the love in his eyes when he looked at her made her feel like she could float. Inside, she made him sit at the table while she reheated the stew from supper and sliced bread. She poured coffee and set out butter and the last of her preserves. Kieran ate like a man starving, and she suspected he had been pushing hard to get here, not taking time for proper meals. Between bites, he told her everything. About the search for evidence, the witnesses he had tracked down, the dead ends and false leads. About the men who had tried to stop him, the times he had nearly given up. About his father's release and the joy of seeing the old man free. "I wanted to come straight back then," Kieran said. "But I was in northern Texas, and I had promised my father I would see him settled back at the ranch first. That took 2 weeks, getting things back in order, making sure he was truly all right. Then I started south, and I rode as hard as I dared." "You are here now," Delia said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "That is all that matters." "I kept thinking you might have married," Kieran admitted, his fingers tightening around hers. "That some other man would have seen how remarkable you are and convinced you to give up on a fool cowboy chasing ghosts in Texas." "No one else," Delia said firmly. "There could never be anyone else. You took my heart with you when you left Kieran Yates." "All I had left was hope and a lantern in the window." His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "That lantern saved me. On the darkest nights when I wondered if I would ever make it back, I pictured you lighting it. I pictured you waiting. It gave me strength." They talked long into the night, filling in the gaps of 2 years apart. Delia told him about the ranch, the struggles and small victories of managing it alone, about her brother's visits and the town gossip, about the loneliness that had sometimes threatened to overwhelm her and the stubborn hope that had kept her going. "The other women in town thought I was being foolish," she said. "They told me to be practical, to accept that you were not coming back. But I knew. Somehow I knew you were alive." "I felt it." "I felt you too," Kieran said softly. "On the loneliest nights I swear I could feel your presence, like you were watching over me." Eventually, exhaustion caught up with them both. Delia showed Kieran to the small spare room, acutely aware of propriety even though every fiber of her being wanted him closer. They were not married yet, and despite the years and the circumstances, she held to the standards she had been raised with. Kieran understood without her having to explain. He kissed her goodnight at the bedroom door, a gentle kiss full of promise. "Tomorrow we will go into town and see the Reverend," he said. "I do not want to wait any longer than necessary to make you my wife." "Tomorrow," Delia agreed, her heart soaring. She returned to her own room but found sleep elusive. Joy and disbelief warred within her. Kieran was home. He was really home. After all this time, all the waiting, he had come back to her just as he promised. She pressed her hands to her chest, feeling her heart race with happiness. In the spare room, Kieran lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. The mattress was more comfortable than the ground he had been sleeping on for weeks, but it was not the bed that kept him awake. It was the knowledge that Delia was just down the hall, that tomorrow they would begin the process of building a life together, that all the struggles and hardships had led to this moment. He thought of his father's words when Kieran had left the ranch in Texas. "Go get your girl, son. Do not waste another moment. Life is too short and love too precious." His father had been in prison for a crime he did not commit, had lost 2 years of his life to injustice. But he had survived and his name was cleared. Some wrongs could be made right, some losses recovered. It gave Kieran hope for the future, for all the years he and Delia would have together. Morning came with a brilliant sunrise. Kieran woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, for a moment disoriented before memory flooded back. He was at Delia's ranch. He was home. He dressed quickly and emerged to find Delia already up, preparing breakfast. She had changed into a clean dress, pale blue calico, and had braided her dark hair. She looked beautiful and almost shy as he entered the kitchen. "Good morning," she said, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Good morning," Kieran replied, moving to her side. He kissed her cheek, and she leaned into him for a moment before turning back to the stove. They ate breakfast together, the morning light streaming through the windows. Everything felt both surreal and perfectly natural, as if they had been doing this forever, as if he had never left. After breakfast, Kieran went out to check on Ranger and the other animals while Delia cleaned up. She changed into her best dress, a green gingham with lace at the collar and cuffs. It had been her mother's, carefully preserved. She wanted to look nice for the Reverend, for this day that would change her life forever. Kieran hitched up Delia's small wagon, and they drove into Ardmore together. The town had grown since Kieran had been away. There were new buildings on Main Street, more houses spreading out from the center. Progress marching steadily forward. People stared as they drove past, recognizing both of them, clearly surprised to see Kieran Yates back after so long. Delia held her head high, her hand resting on Kieran's arm. Let them stare. Let them see that her faith had been rewarded, that her wait had not been in vain. They stopped first at the Reverend's house, a modest frame building beside the church. Reverend Thomas opened the door, his eyebrows rising in surprise when he saw them. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, then looked at Kieran. "And Mr. Yates, unless I am mistaken. We had heard you were gone." "I was, sir," Kieran said. "But I am back now, and I would like to ask you to perform a wedding, as soon as possible if you would be willing." The Reverend's stern face softened into a smile. "I take it Miss Zimmerman has agreed to be your bride." "She has, sir." "Then it would be my honor. Come in, let us discuss the arrangements." They spent an hour with the Reverend going over the details. They agreed on a date 3 days hence, on Saturday afternoon. That would give them time to arrange things properly, to notify friends and acquire a license from the county clerk. When they emerged from the Reverend's house, they found several of the town ladies waiting, clearly bursting with curiosity. Among them was Margaret Cooper, a woman who had been particularly vocal about Delia's foolishness in waiting for a man who would never return. "Miss Zimmerman," Margaret said, her voice tight, "we heard that Mr. Yates had returned." "He has," Delia said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "And we are to be married on Saturday. You are all welcome to attend." The women broke into excited chatter, surrounding Delia with questions and congratulations. Kieran stepped back, letting her have this moment. He saw the vindication in her eyes, the quiet triumph. She had been right to wait, right to hope. Let everyone see it. They went next to the county clerk's office to file for a marriage license. The clerk, a middle-aged man named Thornton, processed the paperwork efficiently. "Congratulations to you both," he said as he handed over the document. "We need Miss Zimmerman's brother to co-sign as well, since she is unmarried and he is her nearest male relative." "Samuel is in town today," Delia said. "He mentioned it last week. We can find him." They located Samuel at the general store where he was ordering supplies. When he saw Kieran, his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, suspicion, and finally something like relief. "Kieran Yates," Samuel said, extending his hand. "I did not think we would see you again." "I promised your sister I would return," Kieran said, shaking his hand firmly. "I keep my promises." Samuel looked at Delia, saw the happiness radiating from her, and nodded slowly. "I can see that. She has waited a long time for you." "I know, and I aim to spend the rest of my life making it up to her." They explained about the wedding, and Samuel signed the license without hesitation. "About time my sister had some happiness," he said. "Our parents would have approved. They liked you, Kieran, said you were honest and hardworking." "I will take care of her," Kieran promised. "With everything I have." "I know you will," Samuel said. He pulled Delia into a hug. "Be happy, sister. You deserve it." Over the next 3 days, the small community rallied around the upcoming wedding. The ladies of the church volunteered to prepare food for a celebration after the ceremony. Delia's neighbors offered to help clean and decorate the church. The local seamstress took in Delia's mother's wedding dress, altering it to fit perfectly. Kieran spent the time working on Delia's ranch, fixing things that had been neglected or that she had not been able to manage alone. He repaired the barn door, reinforced the fence around the chicken coop, and replaced several worn boards on the porch. It felt good to work with his hands, to make a physical contribution to the place that would be his home. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, talking and making plans. They discussed how they would expand the ranch, perhaps add more cattle. Kieran had some money saved from work he had done in Texas, and Delia had been careful with what she had. Together, they could build something strong and lasting. "I want children," Delia said one evening, her cheeks flushing pink in the twilight, "if we are blessed with them." "I want that too," Kieran said, pulling her close. "A whole house full if God wills it." "Maybe not a whole house full," Delia said with a laugh, "but several would be nice." They talked about names, about how they would raise their children, about the values they wanted to pass on. Family, honesty, hard work, love. The same values that had sustained them both through difficult times. Friday evening, Delia's closest friends came to the ranch for a small gathering, a pre-wedding celebration. The women brought food and gifts, practical things like quilts and kitchen tools, but also tokens of affection, embroidered linens and jars of preserves. Kieran had gone to stay with Samuel for the night, observing the tradition that the bride and groom should not see each other the day before the wedding. He spent the evening with Samuel and some of the local men, drinking moderate amounts of whiskey and accepting congratulations and advice. "Marriage is work," one of the older ranchers told him, "but it is the best kind of work. You put in the effort and you get back more than you gave." "I know how lucky I am," Kieran said. "I will not take her for granted." "See that you do not," Samuel said, but there was warmth in his voice. "Delia deserves the best." "She deserves better than me," Kieran admitted, "but I will spend my life trying to be worthy of her." Saturday dawned clear and beautiful, the Oklahoma sky a brilliant blue with just a few high clouds. Delia woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. Today she would marry Kieran Yates, the man she loved, the man she had waited for through 2 long years. Her friends arrived to help her dress. The wedding gown was simple but lovely, white muslin with delicate lace at the throat and wrists. It fit her perfectly, the seamstress having worked magic with the alterations. They arranged her hair in an elegant style, pinning it up with combs that had belonged to her mother. "You look beautiful," her friend Sarah said, tears in her eyes, "like a princess from a storybook." Delia looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy, truly happy, perhaps for the first time since her father died. Her eyes shone with joy and anticipation. At the church, Kieran was pacing nervously in the small room behind the sanctuary. He wore a new suit, purchased from the general store with money he could barely afford to spend. But this was important. This was the most important day of his life, and he wanted to look his best for Delia. Samuel appeared in the doorway. "Time to take your place," he said. "Your bride will be here soon." Kieran's heart hammered as he walked to the front of the church. The pews were filled with people from town and the surrounding ranches. Apparently, their story had captured the imagination of the community. A woman who waited faithfully, a man who rode home to her. It was the stuff of songs and stories. The small church organ began to play, and everyone stood. Kieran turned to face the back of the church, and his breath caught in his throat. Delia stood in the doorway, framed by sunlight, looking like an angel descended to earth. Her brother stood beside her, ready to walk her down the aisle. But Kieran only had eyes for the woman who had waited for him, who had kept a lantern burning to guide him home. She began to walk toward him, her steps measured and graceful. Their eyes met and held, and in that moment, nothing else existed. Not the people watching, not the reverend waiting to perform the ceremony. Just the two of them and the love that had survived distance and time and hardship. Samuel placed Delia's hand in Kieran's and stepped back. Kieran's fingers closed around hers, warm and sure. They turned to face the reverend together. The ceremony was traditional, the words worn smooth by countless repetitions. But when Kieran spoke his vows, his voice was thick with emotion. "I, Kieran Yates, take you, Delia Zimmerman, to be my wedded wife. I promise to love you, to honor you, to cherish you, in sickness and in health, in times of joy and times of sorrow. I will be faithful to you all the days of my life. This I vow before God and these witnesses." Delia's voice trembled as she spoke her own vows, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I, Delia Zimmerman, take you, Kieran Yates, to be my wedded husband. I promise to love you, to honor you, to cherish you. I will be your partner in all things, your comfort in difficulties, your companion in joy. I will be faithful to you all the days of my life. This I vow before God and these witnesses." They exchanged simple gold rings, the bands warm from being held in the reverend's hand. When the reverend pronounced them man and wife, Kieran pulled Delia into his arms and kissed her with all the love and longing he had held inside for 2 years. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers. They walked down the aisle together, husband and wife at last, stepping out into the bright Oklahoma sunshine. People crowded around them with congratulations and well wishes. Someone had decorated Delia's wagon with ribbons and flowers, and they climbed up together for the ride to the church hall, where the celebration feast waited. The afternoon passed in a blur of food and music and laughter. The ladies had outdone themselves, preparing tables full of fried chicken, ham, biscuits, vegetables, pies, and cakes. Someone had brought a fiddle and there was dancing. Kieran led Delia in a waltz, holding her close, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. "Happy," he murmured against her ear. "Happier than I have ever been," she replied. "You are worth every minute I waited." "I will make sure you never regret it," Kieran promised. As the sun began to set, they slipped away from the celebration, driving back to the ranch that was now their home together. Someone, probably Samuel, had already transported Kieran's few belongings from town. His saddlebag sat on the porch, Ranger contentedly grazing in the pasture with Delia's other horses. Kieran lifted Delia from the wagon and carried her across the threshold, a tradition he would not forego. She laughed, her arms around his neck, and he spun her around in the small parlor before setting her down gently. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," he said. I love the sound of that, Delia said. Mrs. Yates, your wife. My wife, Kieran repeated, wonder in his voice. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. That night, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, learning each other in ways that had been forbidden before. Delia had waited so long for this, for the completion of their love, and the reality exceeded every dream. Kieran was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, skin against skin, hearts beating in unison. I used to dream about this, Delia whispered. About you coming home, about us being together like this. So did I, Kieran said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Every lonely night on the trail, I dreamed of holding you like this. You never have to leave again, Delia said fiercely. Promise me, Kieran, we face everything together from now on. I promise, he said. Nothing will take me from your side again. Where you are, that is where I belong. They fell asleep wrapped in each other, the lantern left dark for the first time in over 2 years. There was no need for it anymore. Kieran was home, and the waiting was over. The following weeks settled into a rhythm of domestic bliss. They woke together each morning, often before dawn, and worked side by side to manage the ranch. Kieran's strength and experience made a tremendous difference. Tasks that had taken Delia hours to complete alone now took half the time with both of them working. They expanded the herd, purchasing 6 more head of cattle from a neighboring ranch. Kieran negotiated a good price, his years of working around livestock giving him knowledge of quality animals. They also added to the chicken flock and acquired 2 pigs, planning for the future. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit on the porch together and watch the sun set over the prairie. Sometimes they talked, sharing thoughts and stories. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, Delia's head on Kieran's shoulder, his arm around her waist. About 6 weeks after the wedding, Delia began to feel unwell in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she had eaten, but when the nausea persisted for several days, a different possibility occurred to her. She counted back the weeks since the wedding night, her heart beginning to race. She said nothing to Kieran yet, not wanting to get his hopes up if she was wrong. But after another week of morning sickness and unusual fatigue, she visited the town doctor, a kindly older man named Dr. Harrison. He examined her and confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was with child, probably about 2 months along. The baby would come in late spring. Delia walked out of the doctor's office in a daze of joy and fear. A baby. She was going to be a mother. Kieran was going to be a father. The realization was overwhelming and wonderful. She waited until that evening to tell him. They had finished supper, and Kieran was reading aloud from the newspaper, a weekly publication that came from Fort Smith. Delia watched him, this man she loved more than life itself, and tried to find the words. "Kieran," she said finally, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the paper, his expression curious. "What is it?" "I went to see Dr. Harrison today," she said. Alarm flashed across Kieran's face. "Are you ill? What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Delia said quickly, reaching for his hand. "Everything is right, very right. Kieran, we are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, the words not seeming to register. Then his face transformed, joy spreading across his features like sunrise. "A baby," he said. "Truly, truly." Dr. Harrison confirmed it. "I am about 2 months along. The baby should come in May." Kieran stood up so fast his chair tipped over. He pulled Delia into his arms, holding her tight but carefully, as if she had suddenly become made of glass. "A baby," he said again, his voice choked with emotion. "Delia, I cannot believe it. We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Delia asked, though she could see the answer on his face. Happy does not begin to cover it, Kieran said. He pulled back to look at her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. This is everything I wanted, you, a home, a family, all of it. He kissed her then, tender and reverent, and Delia felt tears slide down her cheeks. Happy tears, grateful tears. Over the following months they prepared for the baby's arrival. Kieran built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and carving delicate designs into the headboard. Delia sewed tiny clothes, marveling at how small they were. Her friends from church threw a small party, bringing gifts and advice. Winter came, but it was mild that year with only a few light snows. Delia's pregnancy progressed normally, though the last months were uncomfortable. She grew large and ungainly, frustrated by her inability to do all the tasks she was used to managing. Kieran took over the heavier work without complaint and hired a young man from town to help with the daily chores. On a warm evening in mid-May, just after Delia had finished clearing supper dishes, her water broke. She stood in the kitchen, staring down at the puddle on the floor in shock. "Kieran," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. "Kieran, it is time." He appeared instantly from the barn where he had been checking on a cow due to calve. When he saw her face, he went pale. "The baby. Now." "Now," Delia confirmed as the first contraction gripped her. Kieran sprang into action. He had planned for this, had made arrangements weeks ago. He helped Delia to bed, then rode at breakneck speed to fetch Dr. Harrison and Mrs. Cooper, an experienced midwife. They returned within the hour, and by then Delia's contractions were coming hard and fast. Kieran was banished to the parlor, as was customary for husbands during birth. He paced like a caged animal, flinching at every cry of pain from the bedroom. Samuel had arrived, summoned by a neighbor who had seen Kieran's frantic ride to town, and he sat in a chair trying to appear calm. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time," Samuel said. "Delia is strong. She will be fine." "I know," Kieran said, but he could not stop pacing. Every sound from the bedroom felt like a knife to his heart. He had survived gun fights and dangerous trails, but this was worse. This was his wife, his beloved Delia, in pain, and there was nothing he could do to help her. The hours crawled by. Midnight came and went. Dawn broke, painting the sky with pink and gold, and then, finally, a new sound pierced the air. A baby's cry, strong and lusty. Kieran stopped mid-pace, his heart in his throat. The bedroom door opened and Mrs. Cooper emerged, smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Yates," she said. "You have a son. A big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing fine." A son. He had a son. Kieran's knees went weak with relief. Samuel clapped him on the back, grinning. "A nephew. Well done, brother. Can I see them?" Kieran asked. "Give us a few more minutes to get them settled," Mrs. Cooper said. "Then you can meet your son." Those few minutes felt like eternity. Finally, Dr. Harrison opened the door and beckoned him in. Kieran entered the bedroom almost afraid, his eyes going immediately to the bed. Delia lay propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion. But she was smiling, a radiant, beautiful smile. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was a tiny baby. "Come meet your son," Delia said softly. Kieran approached the bed and looked down at the infant. He was red-faced and wrinkled, his little fists waving in the air. Dark hair covered his small head, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they were deep blue. "He is perfect," Kieran breathed. "Delia, he is perfect." "Hold him," Delia said, carefully transferring the baby into Kieran's arms. Kieran had handled newborn calves and foals, but nothing had prepared him for the feeling of holding his own child. The baby was so small, so fragile, yet he could feel the life and strength in the tiny body. His son. His and Delia's son. What should we name him? Kieran asked, unable to take his eyes off the baby. They had discussed names but had not settled on one. Now, looking at her husband and son together, Delia knew. "Wyatt," she said. "Wyatt Samuel Yates, for strength and honor." "Wyatt," Kieran repeated. "I like it. Hello, Wyatt." "Welcome to the world, son." The baby made a small sound, and Kieran's heart swelled with a love so fierce it was almost painful. He would protect this child with his life, would do everything in his power to give him a good future. He looked at Delia, seeing the exhaustion and joy in her face, and felt his love for her deepen even further. She had given him this gift, this precious life. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you for him. Thank you for waiting for me, for believing in me. Thank you for everything." "We made it," Delia said, her eyes bright with tears. "We made it through all of it, and look what we have now." Kieran carefully returned baby Wyatt to her arms and sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping his arm around both of them. His family, complete and whole and perfect. Over the following weeks, they adjusted to life with a newborn. Wyatt was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he kept them up many nights with his demands to be fed and changed. Kieran proved to be a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor with a fussy baby, changing diapers without complaint, watching over Wyatt with fierce protectiveness. Delia recovered quickly from the birth, her natural strength and vitality reasserting themselves. She loved being a mother, loved watching Kieran with their son. Sometimes she would look up from nursing Wyatt to find Kieran watching them both with an expression of such profound love and contentment that it brought tears to her eyes. Summer passed into fall, and Wyatt grew, developing a personality all his own. He was curious and alert, his eyes tracking movement, his hands reaching for everything within grasp. He had his father's green eyes and his mother's determined chin. As winter approached, they received word that Kieran's father was ill. The old man had developed a persistent cough that would not go away, and the doctor feared consumption. Kieran was torn, wanting to go to his father but not wanting to leave Delia and Wyatt. "We will go together," Delia decided. "Your father should meet his grandson, and I want to see the man who raised such a good man." So they made the journey north to Texas, traveling carefully with 6-month-old Wyatt. It was a long trip, but Wyatt handled it well, and they reached Kieran's childhood home in early November. Kieran's father, John Yates, was indeed ill, but his face lit up when he saw them. He held baby Wyatt with gentle, gnarled hands, tears streaming down his weathered face. "He looks like you did as a baby," John said to Kieran. "Same serious expression, same strong spirit." They stayed for 3 weeks, Kieran helping to manage the ranch while Delia and a hired woman cared for John. The old man's cough eased somewhat with rest and good food, and by the time they left, he seemed stronger. "Thank you for bringing them," John said to Kieran as they prepared to depart. "Seeing my grandson, meeting your wife, it has given me reason to fight this sickness. I aim to see that boy grow up." "Then you had better take care of yourself," Kieran said, embracing his father carefully. "We will visit again in the spring." The journey home to Oklahoma felt different. They were returning as a complete family unit, bound by love and blood and shared experience. Wyatt babbled happily from his basket in the back of the wagon, and Delia and Kieran talked about the future, about expanding their ranch, about maybe giving Wyatt a brother or sister someday. Christmas that year was their first as a family. They decorated the house with evergreen boughs and strings of popcorn. Samuel and his new wife, Rebecca, came for dinner, and they filled the small house with laughter and warmth. Wyatt, now 7 months old and trying to crawl, provided endless entertainment. "Hard to believe 3 years ago I thought you were foolish for waiting," Samuel said to Delia as they sat by the fire. "I was wrong, dead wrong. Look at all you would have missed if you had given up." "I could not give up," Delia said simply, glancing at Kieran, who was on the floor playing with Wyatt. My heart knew what my head tried to deny. He was worth the wait. That night, after their guests had left and Wyatt was asleep in his cradle, Delia and Kieran stood together at the window, looking out at the dark prairie. There was no lantern burning. There had not been one since the night Kieran came home. No need for a beacon when you had already found your way. "What are you thinking?" Kieran asked, his arm around her waist. "I am thinking about that lantern," Delia said. "About all those nights I lit it, all those times I wondered if you would ever see it, and how you did in the end. You saw it from miles away and rode home just like you promised." "That light saved me," Kieran said quietly. "Not just that night, but every night before it. Knowing you were waiting, knowing you had not given up, it kept me going through times I wanted to quit." "We saved each other," Delia said, turning to look up at him. "I waited for you, but you gave me something to wait for. You gave me hope and purpose when I had lost both." Kieran kissed her, soft and sweet. "I love you, Delia Yates. I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," she replied, "always and forever." The years that followed were full and happy. The ranch prospered under their joint management. They expanded gradually, adding land and livestock as their resources allowed. Kieran's reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher grew, and he was often sought out for advice by newer settlers. Wyatt grew into a bright, active boy, full of questions and energy. When he was 3, Delia gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Rose. 2 years after that, another son arrived whom they called Benjamin. Their house rang with the sounds of children playing, of laughter and occasional tears, of life being lived fully. Kieran never forgot the 2 years he had been away, the time he had lost with Delia. He made sure to never take a single day with his family for granted. Every morning he woke grateful. Every night he went to bed counting his blessings. Delia sometimes thought about those lonely years of waiting, but they no longer held pain. Instead, they had become part of their story, proof of the strength of their love. She had waited, he had returned, and everything that came after was sweeter for the trial they had endured. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kieran had a gift made for Delia. It was a painting, commissioned from a traveling artist who had passed through Ardmore. The painting showed a prairie landscape at night, dark and vast, with a single point of light glowing in the distance, a lantern in a window. "So we never forget," Kieran said as he presented it to her. "Never forget that love is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth everything." Delia held the painting and cried, but they were happy tears. She hung it above the mantel, where it would remain for the rest of their lives, a reminder of faith rewarded and promises kept. Kieran's father lived another 8 years after that visit when Wyatt was a baby. He died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, having seen his grandchildren grow and knowing his son was happy. They buried him on the Texas ranch where he had spent his life, and Kieran grieved but also felt grateful for the time they had been given. Samuel and Rebecca had children of their own, 4 daughters who grew up playing with their Yates cousins. The 2 families remained close, celebrating holidays together, helping each other through difficult times. Samuel often joked that he had gained not just a brother-in-law but a best friend when Kieran came back. The frontier continued to change around them. Oklahoma Territory was opened up more and more to settlement. Towns grew into cities. The wild days faded into history and legend. But in some ways, life remained constant. People still worked the land, still raised families, still built lives from hard work and determination. When Wyatt was 15, showing every sign of growing into as fine a man as his father, he asked Kieran about the early days. "Tell me again about when you rode home to Ma," Wyatt said. They were mending fence together, father and son working side by side. Kieran smiled, though he had told the story many times. "I saw a light in the distance," he said. "A lantern your mother had placed in the window. I had been gone 2 years, and I was afraid she might have given up on me. But that light told me she was still waiting, still believing I would come home." "Were you scared?" Wyatt asked. "Terrified," Kieran admitted. "I was scared she would not want me anymore, scared too much time had passed. But I was more scared of not trying, of giving up when I was so close to everything I wanted. I want to find love like that someday," Wyatt said quietly, "like you and Ma have." "You will," Kieran assured him. "Real love is out there for those brave enough to seek it and patient enough to wait for it. Your mother taught me that." That evening, Kieran recounted the conversation to Delia. They sat on the porch as they had done countless evenings before, watching the sun set over the prairie. "He is growing up so fast," Delia said, a touch of wistfulness in her voice. "Soon he will be a man starting his own life." "We raised him right," Kieran said. "Him and Emma and Benjamin, they are good children, Delia. You should be proud." "I am proud of all of us," Delia said. "Look what we built from nothing but hope and love." Kieran took her hand, lifting it to his lips. Her hair was starting to show threads of silver now, and there were laugh lines around her eyes. To him, she was more beautiful than ever. "Best decision I ever made was promising to come back to you," he said. "Second best was seeing that lantern and riding like hell toward it." Delia laughed, the sound still as bright and joyful as when she was young. "Best decision I ever made was lighting that lantern every night, refusing to let hope die." "We were both stubborn fools," Kieran said fondly. "Lucky stubborn fools," Delia corrected. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the vast Oklahoma sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. Inside, their children were finishing evening chores. Beyond the house, the land they had built a life on stretched away into shadows. There was no lantern burning in the window. There had not been one for over 15 years. But the light that lantern had represented, the hope and faith and enduring love, that still burned bright. It lived in the family they had created, in the life they shared, in every choice they made together. Kieran Yates had seen that light from miles away and ridden home. And he had been coming home to Delia every day since, in 1,000 small ways, choosing her and their life together over and over again. Because that was what real love was, not just the grand gesture of riding through the night toward a beacon, but the daily decision to show up, to work hard, to be patient and kind, to build something lasting together. The Wild West was changing, becoming settled and civilized. But some truths remained constant. Love was worth fighting for. Faith could move mountains. And sometimes, all it took was a light in the window and someone brave enough to ride toward it. Years continued to pass, each one adding to the rich tapestry of their shared life. The children grew and started families of their own. Wyatt married a schoolteacher named Catherine and took over management of the ranch. Emma married a lawyer from town and moved to Oklahoma City, which was growing rapidly. Benjamin, the youngest, had a restless spirit and headed west to try his luck in Colorado, though he came home for visits regularly. Kieran and Delia became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They watched the world transform around them. The railroad came through Ardmore, connecting them to larger markets. Automobiles began to appear on the dirt roads. Electric lights replaced oil lamps in many homes. The world of their youth became history, stories told to wide-eyed children who could not imagine a time before such conveniences. Through it all, their love remained the constant. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The party was held at the ranch, now significantly expanded and prosperous. People came from all over the county to honor the couple who had become something of a legend. "Tell us the story," the youngest grandchildren begged. "Tell us about the lantern." So Kieran, his hair now white and his face deeply lined but his green eyes still sharp, told the story once more. About a young cowboy who had to leave the woman he loved. About a young woman who refused to give up hope. About a lantern that burned for 2 years, a beacon in the darkness. About a promise kept and a love that endured. Delia sat beside him, her hand in his, and filled in the details he forgot. They had told this story so many times, but it never got old. It was their story, the foundation of everything that came after. "The point is," Kieran concluded, looking around at all the faces watching him, "real love is worth waiting for, it is worth fighting for. And when you find it, you hold on tight and never let go. Even when it is hard," one of the teenagers asked. "Especially when it is hard," Delia said firmly. "The easy times are easy. It is how you handle the hard times that defines a relationship. Your grandfather and I had plenty of hard times. But we faced them together, and that made all the difference." As the party continued around them, Kieran and Delia slipped away for a quiet moment. They walked slowly, their steps not as spry as they once were, to the old barn where Kieran had first stabled his horse on that night he came home. "Remember," Kieran said, gesturing to the barn, "I was so nervous I could barely unsaddle Ranger. My hands were shaking." "I remember," Delia said, smiling. "I was shaking too. I kept thinking I was dreaming, that you could not really be there." "But I was there," Kieran said, pulling her close. "And I have been here ever since." "The best years of my life," Delia said softly. "All because I lit a lantern and you saw it." "All because you had faith," Kieran corrected. "Faith in me, in us, in love itself. You taught me what real love looks like, Delia, patient, enduring, faithful." They stood together in the gathering dusk, two old people who had loved each other for more than half a century, who had built a life and a legacy from hope and hard work. "If I had it to do over," Kieran said, "I would not change a single thing, even the hard parts. Because it all led to this, to us, to everything we have." "I would change one thing," Delia said, and when Kieran looked at her in surprise, she smiled. "I would have made you promise not to stay away so long. 2 years was far too much time apart." Kieran laughed, the sound deep and rich. "Fair enough. But we made up for it, did we not? 50 years together, and I still love you more each day." "And I love you," Delia replied. "Today, tomorrow, always." They returned to the party to find Wyatt preparing to give a toast. Their eldest son, now a man of 50 himself, raised his glass and called for quiet. "To my parents," Wyatt said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Who taught us all what it means to love truly. Who showed us that faith and patience are rewarded, that promises matter, and that a life built on love will endure any storm. Ma, Pa, thank you for everything you have given us, for the example you set, for the family you created. We are all here because of your love story." To Kieran and Delia. The crowd chorused, raising glasses high. Kieran and Delia stood together, overwhelmed by the love surrounding them. This was what that lantern had led to. Not just their own happiness, but generations of family, all stemming from a decision made on a lonely prairie night. To wait, to hope. To believe that love could overcome any obstacle. As the stars came out, the same stars that had watched over a young woman lighting a lantern and a young man riding desperately toward home, the party continued. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, the sound of family coming together. But Kieran and Delia found a quiet corner and simply sat, hand in hand, watching it all. Their life's work spread out before them. Proof that love was not just a feeling but a choice, made every day in big ways and small. "No regrets?" Kieran asked softly. "Not a single one," Delia replied. You? Only that I cannot live it all over again, Kieran said. Because I would gladly. Every moment with you has been a gift. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind only possible between two people who had shared so much, who knew each other's thoughts and feelings without words. The party went on around them, but they were in their own world, a world built over decades of love and commitment. When at last the celebration ended and the guests departed, when the grandchildren were tucked away in spare rooms and the house finally quiet, Kieran and Delia stood once more at the window where so long ago a lantern had burned. "Should we light it?" Kieran asked, half joking. "For old time's sake, no need," Delia said, looking up at him with eyes that still held the warmth and love that had captured his heart so many years ago. "You are already home. You have been home for 50 years. Home," Kieran repeated, liking the sound of the word. "Yes, I am home. And I always will be as long as you are here." They climbed the stairs to bed, their steps slow but steady. They had made this journey together thousands of times, and they would make it thousands more, God willing. Each day was a blessing, each moment precious. As they settled into sleep, wrapped in each other's arms the way they had been since that first night as husband and wife, Delia thought about the young woman she had been. Alone and scared, but determined to wait. Lighting that lantern night after night, believing against all logic that the man she loved would see it and return. That young woman could never have imagined all that would come from her simple act of faith. The children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. The prosperous ranch, the respected family name. The love that had deepened and grown richer with each passing year. But most of all, she could never have imagined how completely and perfectly right it would feel to spend a lifetime with Kieran Yates. The cowboy who saw her lantern from miles away and rode home. "I love you," Kieran murmured, already half asleep. "I love you too," Delia whispered back. And in the darkness, though no lantern burned, their love shone bright, a beacon that had guided them through over 5 decades and would light their way until the very end. The end came gently, as these things sometimes do. Kieran passed first, in his sleep on a cool autumn night, Delia beside him. He was 83 years old and had lived a full, rich life. His last words to his wife, spoken as they settled into bed that final night, were the same words he had spoken countless times before. "I love you, Delia. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are mine," Delia had replied, squeezing his hand. "Always and forever." She found him in the morning, peaceful and still. Though her heart broke, she did not fall apart. They had talked about this inevitability, had prepared for it as much as anyone could. Kieran had lived a good life, had died surrounded by love, knowing he was cherished. What more could anyone ask? The funeral was large, the church packed with family and friends, with people whose lives Kieran had touched over 8 decades. They told stories of his kindness, his integrity, his devotion to family. They spoke of the love story that had inspired so many, of the man who had ridden home to his love and stayed there for the rest of his life. Delia sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, dry-eyed and dignified. She had cried her tears in private. Today was for celebrating Kieran's life, not mourning his death. At the graveside, as they lowered her beloved into the earth, Delia placed a single item in the coffin with him. A photograph, old and faded, of a young woman with dark hair and serious eyes. The photograph Kieran had carried through 2 years of searching that had sustained him through the hardest times. "Until we meet again," she whispered. "Wait for me, my love. I will be along soon enough." Delia lived another 4 years after Kieran's passing. She remained in the ranch house, cared for by Wyatt and his family, but still fiercely independent. She tended her garden, entertained visits from grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and spent many evenings sitting on the porch, remembering. On the anniversary of the night Kieran had come home, she did something she had not done in over 50 years. She lit a lantern and placed it in the window. "Just in case you are looking for your way back to me," she said to the empty room, to the spirit of the man she loved. "I will always leave a light burning for you, Kieran Yates." She passed quietly one spring evening, the same month baby Wyatt had been born all those years ago. She simply went to sleep and did not wake up, slipping away as gently as a whisper. She was 81 years old. They buried her beside Kieran, reuniting them in death as they had been united in life. On the shared headstone, Wyatt had inscribed words that told their story. Kieran Yates and Delia Yates, he saw her light and rode home she waited faithfully, and was rewarded together forever. Years passed, then decades. The ranch changed hands as generations succeeded each other. But the story lived on, told and retold, passed down through the family. The painting of the lantern in the window remained over the mantel, carefully preserved. It became a family tradition that on anniversaries and special occasions, a lantern would be lit in the window of the old ranch house. A reminder of where they came from, of the love that had started it all, of faith rewarded and promises kept. The descendants of Kieran and Delia Yates spread across the country, carrying with them the values instilled by that first generation. Integrity, hard work, faith, and above all, love. The kind of love that waits patiently, that endures separation, that burns bright in the darkest nights. And sometimes, late at night when the wind blows across the Oklahoma prairie, locals swear they can see a light in the window of the old Yates Ranch. A lantern burning, eternal and bright, a symbol of a love that death could not diminish, that time could not fade. A reminder that some lights never go out. That real love, true love, the kind worth waiting for and worth fighting for, burns forever. She left a lantern burning every night. He saw it from miles away and rode home. And in doing so, they created a legacy that would endure for generations. Proof that love, faith, and patience can overcome any obstacle, bridge any distance, survive any trial. Their story was not just theirs alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever loved deeply, who had ever waited hopefully, who had ever believed that somewhere in the darkness, there was a light calling them home. And to everyone who had ever been brave enough to ride toward that light, trusting in love to guide the way. The Wild West faded into history. The frontier closed. The world changed beyond recognition. But the truth at the heart of Kieran and Delia's story remained constant, as true today as it was in 1884, as it will be 100 years from now. Love endures. Faith is rewarded. And sometimes, all it takes to find your way home is a lantern in the window and someone who loves you enough to keep it burning.